Hello, wonderful. It is Sarah, and I'm here with Gaby Abrams. Hey, Gaby, how are you?
Hi, Sarah. So excited to be here.
So we have a mutual friend, Amy, who's already been on the podcast. And so we're like long lost besties, even though we're meeting here on this interview.
Amy is like my mutual friend with everyone.
Oh, that's awesome. Those are good to have.
Yeah.
Those are good habits. So Gaby is a rapid transformation coach, and I'm sure she's going to tell you more about what that means. But we're going to talk about getting out of feelings of hoard self-worth or feeling like not good enough or feeling stuck in your subconscious. And she is the gal to do this. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, what it means to be a rapid transformation coach.
Awesome. So I am a former lawyer turned rapid transformation coach. So I mostly work with female entrepreneurs, help them get unstuck in their businesses, money mindset stuff, visibility stuff, imposter syndrome. But I'm certified in a modality called rapid transformation therapy. And it is a mix of hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, cognitive behavioral therapy, traditional talk therapy, and it's pioneered by Marissa Peer, if any of you
Yes.
Mind Valley. Yeah, she's like all over Mind Valley on YouTube. She's amazing. And it's really, really powerful, right? So it gives you the ability to rewire your subconscious, kind of get rid of any blocks that are kind of standing in the way of you and success. And it lets you do it really, really fast in like 1 to 2 sessions. So it's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. We were talking, I told her, Gaby, that the podcast was my 2020 thing that I had been putting off. And then when I got locked into my house and couldn't extrovert as a verb, that this is how this podcast finally came to be. And it's been one of the biggest blessings of a really difficult year. And Gaby was saying, which I thought was very wise considering what she does, that it's often the things that we put off that make the most impact or difference in our lives, right?
Yeah, because we were talking about that comfort zone, right?
Yes, yes.
What we're putting off are like the things that are going to get us out of our comfort zone, right? They're going to push us a little bit. That's why we put them off, is because they're like just maybe sometimes just a little bit, right? But sometimes really, like putting out a podcast is pretty scary. That's like some big, visibility stuff.
Well, the scariest thing for me was like, who's going to do all this tech work? I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Oh,
that was for me. It was like, oh,
right. Yeah. You worry. You're like, oh gosh, like, is it going to be worth it? Like, worth the work? And that's the thing, and those thoughts keep us stuck, right? And they keep us stuck in that comfort zone, right?
Yes. So how do we get out of it?
So a number one rule of the brain is that the brain loves the familiar, right? And it hates the unfamiliar. So the first thing to do, I always tell people, like with all of these things, the first step is always awareness, right? Just awareness that you're doing it, and awareness that you're scared, not because it's something actually scary, but just because it's different, right? And that makes that distinction between like, is it unsafe or just different? Because your brain reads them the same. Right? Your brain doesn't make that distinction. Just like your brain doesn't distinguish between fear and excitement, right? They both feel like they're the same.
And that's so important too when we think about even leaving a bad relationship, right? It feels like, oh, it'll never get better. And it's like, whoa, no, your comfort zone is super uncomfortable if you're in a toxic situation. But your brain, Rick Hansen, have you read the book Buddha's Brain?
No.
Oh, you've got to read it. He has this great line in there.
So many good recommendations for me.
Oh, so yeah. So in Buddha's Brain, he says, our brains are not designed to keep us happy. Our brains are designed to keep us safe.
Yep.
And our brains lie to us and say, oh, you're unsafe if you go out there. You better stay where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I always tell people, if your brain is doing that, it is doing its only job, right? Our brain wants to keep us alive, right? It's only recently that we started like getting outside of our comfort zone, like getting out of survival mode, right? Like just being out of survival mode is a pretty new thing for human beings in terms of like, evolution, right?
So think how rarely people used to meet new people. Like you lived in like this farm town and like for 16 generations and it was already decided who you were.
Yeah.
Before you ever started.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard one time that's why within toxic relationships, right? We used to judge people's character because we knew them for a long time. And now we judge people's first impression.
Oh, so interesting.
Isn't that interesting and terrifying?
Like, yeah. Like our brain is starting to has had to
adapt.
Yeah,
adapt. So what are some tips to get us out of the uncomfortable zone? We'll call it the out of normal, our current normal.
So here's the thing, right? Is that there is, and this is really where the subconscious work comes in, right? Because if you don't do the subconscious work, your brain is going to like you said, it's like your brain doesn't want to make you happy. Your brain wants to make you comfortable.
Ooh, yeah. And comfortable, I like that even better than safe. Yeah.
And sometimes comfortable feels a lot like misery.
I know. Yeah.
It doesn't feel good, right? Like whether it's like that you're not making the money that you want, or you're stuck in a bad relationship, or you're unhappy, right? There's a part of your brain, a big part in all of it, right? That really likes it because it feels safe. And your brain is like, all right, so you say that this is terrible, but we're alive. So it doesn't feel so terrible to me. So the most important thing to do is really figure out subconsciously what's going on. Like, what is the belief that is causing you to stay in this place, right? Is it self-worth? That's a lot of the time, right? Self-worth, like an imposter syndrome, right? Yeah. Like, oh, if I get out of my comfort zone and I actually start doing the things that I'm going to do, that I want to be doing, then people are going to find out that I'm actually not that great.
Yeah.
And they're not going to like me. And then I'm going to get kicked out of the pack, right? We're all tribal. Like, we're talking about evolution. That like feeling of like, oh, I'm going to get kicked out of the pack. Nobody's going to like me. People are going to judge me. That's like our main fear, right? As human beings, we want to be liked. We want to belong. We want to, we need it for our survival.
And two, like if you have gotten yourself in a situation, maybe a toxic even work situation or whatever it is, and you have to admit that you like made a mistake, which is super yucky.
Yes, that's the other thing, right? Is that your brain so badly wants to be right.
Yes.
Even if it's going to be like to your detriment, like your brain so badly wants to be like, oh, we were right. And this wasn't going to go well. And now we get to stay safe.
And that's crazy important. Like I want to like, maybe like have a banner, even though it's on a podcast, so you won't be able to see the banner, for those of you listening on the podcast rather than the video. It's like, no. Like learn from that, right? Learn from your brain creating these blind spots. So you can talk yourself into doing what you're already doing. Yeah. Because what you're already doing has gotten you here. If you want to go somewhere else, you got to talk yourself into something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny that you said that. And we were talking about neuroplasticity before this, but affirmations, right? Such a big thing. And we all are like, and I don't know how, thought ladders and everything, right? Like even saying like, sometimes I can make the right choice, right?
Okay. So explain that is, because I think that's really important in the affirmation language. Can you distinguish between?
So sometimes people say like, it's hard to go from like, I feel like I'm worthless, I do everything wrong, to looking in the mirror and saying, you're amazing, right? Your brain doesn't believe that. It's a big leap, and it's going to take like so much conditioning to get you to think that. But you can start small, right? You can look in the mirror and say like, sometimes I don't do the wrong thing, right? Sometimes it's okay to trust myself. Sometimes I've trusted myself and it's worked out. Sometimes people like me, right? Sometimes I like me. And you can start small, right? And then you can, it's about like erasing those absolutes, right? Of like always, never, always is the one that I jump to. Like this always happens to me. I always do this, right? And if you can at least like take out like always and never and turn it into like sometimes or maybe, that's a thought ladder, right? It's going to get you where you want to go.
And if I might point out here, if anyone's stuck in cognitive dissonance after a toxic relationship, like, oh, I'll never have good things. Yeah. Oh, I'll always pick the wrong guy. That thought letter process, not whatever I said. I didn't have my afternoon coffee before we chatted. Those are so important because I know Tony Robbins, he has this power hour in the mornings. He says every day in every way, I'm getting stronger and stronger. And it's like, Okay. You can talk yourself into that. Okay. I am getting stronger. I'm not the most strong of all the people yet, but I'm getting there. And it shows progress.
Yeah.
So I love that concept of thought ladder.
Yeah. And then I'm doing a course with a friend of mine actually, and it's nice because I've like learned so much from her. Like we're teaching the course together, but I've learned a lot from her. And so she was actually saying, instead of affirmations, to flip it and turn them into questions.
Okay.
To like train your brain to start thinking differently, creatively from like the get-go. So instead of asking yourself, instead of telling yourself just like, right, like I never pick the right person.
Yeah.
Say, why could it be that I could pick the right person? Or what would it look like to pick the right person? And you can start asking yourself questions. And what it does is that it helps with the neural pathways, right? You start building different pathways, right? And you start thinking differently.
And anyone who works with me starts out from the idea that there's something right with you, because after a toxic relationship, you hear about codependency, you hear about, your inner child, and it's like, okay, there's something wrong with you. You didn't have good enough boundaries, whatever it is. And it's like, well, toxic people are very good at finding people who are good, kind, loving, giving, and forgiving. So maybe you were in a toxic relationship because of what was right with you.
Yeah.
Rather than what was wrong with you. I mean, that's exactly, I hadn't heard of that question, but I was like, oh, yeah, that's how this whole process with me starts. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That is so true. It's so true. And it's hard, right? When you're starting in that space, when you are, and not just that, but toxic people are really good at playing into your own insecurities.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
So
because
good.
Ideally, like, not ideally, right? Like what they do is they are mirrors, right? Like they mirror back to you. So they're really good at reading people and really good at picking up on your weaknesses and really good at mirroring back to you the person that you want them to be, right? So sometimes when you're in a toxic relationship, like what you're getting is they're really good at projecting that your fantasy is what they're doing, right? At the beginning. And the self-trust thing is huge. After a toxic relationship, that self-trust. And I find that, like, especially with women business owners, but with everybody, that self-trust piece is so huge.
Well, that's why it's so important to do your own healing work after a toxic situation, whether it be a toxic parent or whatever. If you can't trust yourself, you can't do anything. Like, literally, you can do nothing. You can't parent well. You can't run a business well. You can't start a podcast well. You can't, I mean, you have to learn the art of trusting yourself again. That is like square one. And what is so scary about toxic relationships, because they do distort that.
Yeah.
Oh, so tough. So what are some other tips for getting out of that not good enoughness?
Fun. Okay. So obviously, like, we're talking about inner child. Figuring out, like, so what I love about RGT, it helps you get to the root of it, right? To the root of why. And a lot of people tell me, but it's really cool because you regress to like the actual scene, right? To like the actual.
Oh, I did it.
Oh, you did it?
Yeah, I've done it before. Yeah.
Oh, good, right?
Yeah. So it like took me back, like it was obviously, after toxic relationships, they take away your voice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's their voice becomes bigger than your voice. Yeah. And so it was all these scenes like back to me, like as a child, like singing or in these situations, or I was like trying to use my voice and then learning to use my voice again. It was really interesting.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it's so funny. Like once you have the thought, like it's being triggered, right? Like, so if you have the thought like, oh, I can't use my voice, like then the next time that it happens to you, it's triggering a belief that's already there and just making that belief stronger, right? So by the time that you end up in a toxic relationship, you kind of already have that thought, right? That like, oh, I can't trust my voice, or I can't use my voice. It's not safe for me to use my voice. And then it gets like worse, like so much worse, right? So and it goes back to like when we were kids, because that subconscious mind is formed like by the time you're 7, it's
why it's so important to be aware of your thoughts, right? Like there's that tape playing in your head. One of the things, a thought that I've changed recently is even just this little tiny phrase of like, oh, I can't believe that person did that, in discussion to a toxic person. It's like, why am I teaching myself to lie to myself? I can absolutely believe that they did that, because that's what toxic people do. Like I can absolutely believe it. And even making that little tiny, because that was obviously from my childhood, right? Like, so I was raised very conservatively, like everyone inside our community is good, everyone on the outside is bad, almost type situation, right? So, and it was like, oh, I can't believe people would act like that. I can't believe people wouldn't do the right thing. And that belief obviously was very detrimental in my life, right? And switching that very recently to, oh, I can absolutely believe they did that. I can absolutely believe they did that. Yeah. Another phrase that I flipped recently is the should. Like when something bad happens, there was actually a bracelet, like an ad on Facebook for a safety bracelet. If girls are in unsafe situations, they can like hit the button on the bracelet to get safe. Okay, I can't remember what company it was. But there were people like making comments like, we shouldn't need that. Mm-hmm. No, we shouldn't, but we do. Yeah. So anytime you're using your energy on there shouldn't be evil in the world. There shouldn't be toxic people. There shouldn't be rape. There shouldn't be child abuse. There shouldn't be whatever. What good does that do? Yeah. Okay, there shouldn't, but there is. So What are you going to do about it, right?
It's so true. Yeah. And I had never thought about should in that context. Because I always think about it like, oh, I should do this. I should have done that. Like as a regret and kind of like, oh, I should be doing this, right? Like eating yourself like stuck in that like should spiral. But you're right that we do use it so often. The world should be like this. Right. It should look like this, right? And it's like the expectation thing. Expectations are.
It creates cognitive dissonance, right? Like we're just.
Yeah. Right. You're so right. Because if it should, then, but it is. So what does that tell you?
Right.
That way, life is never the way that I want it to be.
Right. Rather than what can I do about it? Okay. Yeah. If I have my daughter is super young, she doesn't need the bracelet yet, but okay. She shouldn't have to wear a bracelet when she goes to college. Yeah. Or I could do everything I could to protect her.
Yep.
One, there's action. One, there's anger.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, that action. And it is, but it's hard to go to that place of action and like responsibility.
Okay, so what are some tips to get there, people? Because I'm like action. Yeah.
It's hard, right? Especially like I talk to so many people and it's the personal responsibility thing, right? Like this idea that like I was talking at the beginning and I was thinking about it, like when you do find yourself in a situation where you're in a toxic relationship and you say, I did this, right? Like there's that. But it's also really empowering because it's not just like, you have to step out of like that space of like, I did this because things are never working out because whatever. And then if you think about it from like a neuroplasticity standpoint, it's like, I have so much freedom. Every day I'm making choices, right? And I can make better choices all the time. Anything, right? I see it a lot like with business owners and stuff with finances, right? Like, everything's out of my control. People aren't buying. And it's like, well, what can you do? You have to focus on what you're doing, right? Like you can say, people aren't listening to my podcast, right? Not that they're not, you're doing amazing, right? But as a podcast, someone that has a podcast, okay, well, focus on what we can fix, right? Can you record better? Like go back, look at who listened to the most, what episodes were the most listened to, do something like that, right? Can you promote them more? Can you be inviting guests with bigger audiences? There's always so much to do, right? We have so much autonomy and it's really, really liberating.
So what advice do you give to clients or when you're talking to people about recognizing that they have choices? Because I think part of the not enoughness is we kind of get stuck in thinking everyone has choices except for us.
Yes. Yeah. So it's so funny. It's like one of the first, for me, that was like the biggest breakthrough was realizing that I always had a choice. Like, and I think so much we think like, oh, I don't have a choice in this because I have to do it. And it's like, there's that gray space of yes, but you could do it less often. Yes, but you could do it differently. Yes, but you could do it with different energy. Yes, but you could do it with a different expectation, right? Like there's so much gray space in between I have to do this and I don't have to do this, right? That there's so much room for improvement, right? And alignment.
And even thinking like the phrase, oh, I don't have enough time, like telling yourself I don't have enough time versus is there any way I want to choose to use my time differently?
Yeah.
Like that's earth shattering, right? Like that's earth shattering. And, even if it's, I don't have time, a lot of moms right now during the pandemic, we're stuck in virtual school. I don't have any more time. Or can you reframe it? I'm choosing to be a really supportive mother right now. And maybe some other endeavors are not as important right now because I'm choosing to show up for my kids.
Right.
One empowering, one disempowering.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about that. Yeah, it's about the empowering thoughts, right? Switching your thoughts to come from a place of empowerment. Because you're right. Even sometimes when it feels like I don't really have a choice in doing this. Yes, you do. You don't have a choice. There's such few things that we truly don't have a choice in, like blinking.
Oh yeah.
Right?
That's
like,
right.
like blinking, like some body regulation.
Yeah.
But other than that, we have so much choice in our lives, right? And then it's hard. It's also, it has to be a mix of the circumstances. I don't like to bypass,
It's grace and choice, right? I had a situation this week where my kids, it snowed here. Okay. So I had an event scheduled, like a 9 a.m. live. Well, my kids are usually at school at 7:45, which gives me plenty of time. But it snowed and there was a 2-hour delay. And I could either cancel the event, and I ended up, and it was just like a quick, 5 or 6 minute thing. I ended up pulling off the side of the road, doing the live from my phone. Don't worry, it was not driving. My kids were safely in my car. And there's you see all the snow in the background. It actually turned out really pretty, but you see all the snow in the background. I'm like, guess what?
Yeah.
And it was just like, I'm going to choose to show up for what I said I was going to, but choose to show up for my kids as well, rather than, and then having that grace and saying, oh, well, I have to have grace with myself. It's not a perfect circumstance all the time.
Exactly.
It just isn't. Yeah.
And I think as moms who own businesses, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
It is so, that grace piece is so big because it doesn't always look super graceful. And
and it
perfect, right?
And it doesn't feel super graceful sometimes. I mean, my kids virtual a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, it was not good for me. I was really stressed out. Because you don't want to feel like you're not educating your children. And then it's like, whoa, there's no school tomorrow. And I have 18 things on my calendar that were supposed to happen when I was supposed to have childcare, and just learning to have that. And I think that's that piece of not enough, right? Which is where we started. And it's like, I can either say I'm not enough to be all the people that wear all the hats at the same time, or to learn how to have grace with, well, this is what is, right?
Yes. And comparing yourself to other people too, right?
Sure.
Because it looks like, and I think with social media and everything, it's so easy to do now, right? And say everybody else has it so together except me. Right? And that's just the case. It's just not. We're all the same.
Well, it was funny. I did watch a live right before you and I did this, and it's a very famous I won't say who it was, but she's friends with Brene Brown. So you could see the level, how, high level. And she was doing a live, and you could tell she was setting up from her phone, and she didn't realize she'd already hit the live button. So she's in front of her Christmas tree, adjusting here and doing this. I was like, oh honey, you were live.
Oh my God. Yes. And it's so true, right? We're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easy to pretend that we're not and we have it together, but we're all doing the same stuff, right? And it's so, and I think seeing people, I've seen a couple of people who were when they were starting out, and now they're doing great and having huge launches. And I'm like, I went to your first webinar where you had 3 people, right? Or I listened to your watched your first live where I was the only one, right? And it's nice to see that evolution, right? We all start somewhere, and it doesn't look perfect.
And those people got out of their comfort zones, right? They did not stay in that safe zone. It was the evolution of the process, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's so big. That piece is I read this, I listened to a great podcast, and she was saying how people always think that the space between 1 to 100% is that 99% is where the magic is. And she was like, no, it's the 0 to 1%. Not doing it to doing it. That's where it is, right? Then the difference between that and 100% is so easy. You build momentum, you keep doing, you get to, you know.
Well, that's like exercise, right? Like to make yourself start exercising,
Exactly.
you know, that's the hard part. Keeping exercising,
Yeah.
you know, that's much easier.
Yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
feeling.
Okay, Gabby, where can people find more about you?
So you can go to my website, GabyAbrams.com. I have a Facebook group called Ready for More, Change Your Thoughts, Transform Your Life. And I think that those are the two best ways to reach me. You can email me to hello@GabyAbrams.com. And my Instagram is Gabby.Abrams.
Awesome, Gabby. Thank you for helping us on our journey to become toxic person proof.